Hey, last week I did an interview for, I think, somebody who was writing a book, but it's probably one of those deals where somebody gets like a whole bunch of credit as the editor of the book and a whole bunch of people do something for free. I got that impression that that's what it was. But anyway, the topic that basically being interviewed about was manual therapy, soft tissue, etc. And quite frankly, I had a series of questions, and the first piece that I started to ask was, their definitions, parentheses S, of what these techniques meant, because in my mind, manual therapy means a whole lot of things. But they use the word massage, which I don't know whether I'm right or wrong. It's not even relevant because this isn't a right or wrong thing. But when I think of massage, I think of a section or a portion of everything that can be manual therapy. I think of probably techniques like effleurage and petrissage and tapotement and kneading, etc. Because that's how I learned it, and it became ingrained that that's what massage is, or maybe some of the things that it's not. So then you talk about soft tissue mobilization. Okay, well, where does that? What? I guess that probably should exclude high velocity, low amplitude thrusts, all of which are still manual therapy, and all of which are still probably going to be governed by a lot of the same physiology and neurology, and a very systematic approach to choosing what any one individual knows. So at the end of the day, that's not so much important of what it is. For the purpose of an interview or a purpose of how you try to integrate what I'm trying to say here, everything is manual therapy. And if something works, that's the most important thing. There's certainly a very bizarre message that we don't need manual therapy, it's just bizarre, absolutely bizarre. It is similarly bizarre that there are suggestions that manual therapy in certain scopes can actually accomplish what individuals purport it to accomplish, such as you putting a joint back in place, or something is out. Completely ludicrous. If I would welcome those people to unfortunately go through something that is dislocated. That's something that's out, and conservative manual therapy may not be the answer, aside from a qualified individual putting a shoulder back into place. I'm not sure that's something that's in this conversation. But the other thing too is, when we look at certain manual therapies, they seem to sometimes have a very, very dramatic response. And anybody that suggests that that didn't happen, or downgrade, the importance or the relevance or even the validity of that actually happening, is also bizarre and unfortunate. So at no point is there a suggestion that if somebody is claiming a result, really the only angle for me to go down would be to basically call that person a liar. No, their shoulder didn't move more. I don't think that's the case. Like, I've seen it, whether I've done it or watched other people do it. Different types of manual therapies have this immediate dramatic response. It often looks like magic, but magic is just what somebody else doesn't understand. So it doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but it probably didn't happen for the reasons as to why that individual was applying the technique. And guess what? I think I just described the two things, and the only two things that can be proven. You can prove what you thought you did, because it's just what you think, and it's what's motivating you to put your hands in this position and move them in this particular way, at this particular speed, in this particular direction. The other thing that's far more important is that you can actually test that this person has a desirable change. It's and maybe the best way to do it is a whole bunch of people judge two people, and these two people are evaluating the how they're going to measure if this change was made. So it's just shoulder rotation. So person one is going to demonstrate in front of hundreds of people how they're going to measure this shoulder. And then the other person comes in front of the same 100 people, how they're going to measure the shoulder. So now there's two people in this third group, and they're going to say, yes, these two individuals are going to measure the shoulder into external rotation in the same way. Okay, that's crucial. Of course, this never happens, but this is how you would start to craft how you judge and how you decide if this thing holds water and if it's something that you want to do in your attempt to help people, help them improve their life, help them improve their desired adaptations, okay? But now you need a third person that is going to live in the middle of these two testers. They're going to apply whatever color peanut butter they want to spread on the person's shoulder. They're going to punch it with a stick. They're going to use an elbow. They're going to mobilize a grade 3 Maitland where you take it right up to the barrier and let it come back. Maybe they're going to whatever it is that they are going to do, they're not going to measure it. Okay, you're just going to say, we would like for you to improve their shoulder's external rotation. And maybe some other individual would validate that this person actually has external rotation to improve upon. At some point, I'm not sure that there's a lot of squeeze out of a shoulder that already rotates 118 degrees. One person comes in and tests, they leave the room. Somebody does their manual therapy treatment, they leave the room. The third person comes in and they test. I think that's a very important concept to start to judge. Now, I don't think this stuff happens very often because a lot of these manual therapies are commercially driven. They really don't want you to have this level of testing. It doesn't matter because they can work. They can be of value to you, probably outside of how they want you to evaluate. So it's not that manual therapy is so wrong or this evil thing. It probably doesn't do what most people think it does, and we probably don't measure it the way that it should be done. And we should be doing it more. At the end of the day, like, do I really care? So I would probably make a judgment or a supposition that a lot of these people never played a sport in their life. Because if you play a sport and something is impinging on your ability to win your sport, you will do whatever you need to do within your level of ethics and safety and rules of the sport. Most people that be like, you shouldn't do that. And this is your whole pain science crowd. This is your anti-manual therapy crowd. These are people that couldn't even buy a ticket into a stadium, much less play on the center court. So all of these things should be considered when we start to talk about this topic of manual therapy. Now, what I'm going to get to here, and I don't even know right now, maybe we'll make this into multiple parts, seeing how long this goes, or maybe we'll just do something separate. Because there was a lot of things, and I didn't write anything down. I was just answering these folks' questions, and I'm like, did we even answer these questions? Then they're like, yeah, we actually did answer them all, even though it didn't go in sequence for what they sent me. But one of the first questions that they asked is like, well, how do you choose what any type of therapy to use, for any given individual? And to me, that is a very, very systematic approach, which is based on a couple things. One is obviously what you believe. If you believe that you're breaking adhesions or putting joints back into place, you're not a bad human being. You're just not up to speed at a very scientific level. Doesn't mean you're not helping people, and it doesn't mean that you're not measuring things. It's just not what's happening. It's just there's no reason to actually believe that. It makes kind of sense, probably, as I have sat in those same courses and have very, very good trusted relationships, including referring to those types of individuals. But that's not what's happening. So we have to have a belief as to what you're going to choose based on what you think is going to happen. Okay, so you have to find your target and then decide what is the correct, or what do you have available. Maybe not correct, because the more cool stuff, then the more powerful techniques, and the power is typically in the neurology, not necessarily the physiology. Then you have this algorithm, if you will, on how to choose certain things and maybe not choose others. So what we start here with is, am I trying to create a solution that involves pain, or am I trying to use a solution that involves increased motion? At no point is manual therapy ever going to live alone. Can we create an acute change in this by touching someone in some way? Yes, that's absolutely true. You may not even require any physically warranted approach to this touch. You might just kind of do this. And there's some things that I'm going to discuss of why I think that might be just as powerful as a pin and stretch or something that appears to be more specific with contract, relax, etc., etc. All of these things that are valuable, okay? So none of these live alone. And anytime you have this immediate change in how an individual moves, I have no expectation that it lasts. Now, I don't know how long it lasts. I don't know how long it doesn't last. But I do have a strong belief that this needs to translate into an active process, and that's a whole other decision-making tree. But at no point, if we actually have a reason to understand why that happened in the first place, you probably wouldn't think that you don't need any exercise to support the change in the tissue. Okay, so we're going to start here, and this squiggly line down the middle is actually here for a reason, because there's going to be other reasons that may not have a movement limitation. Over here on this side, we're going to talk about recovery, where manual therapy certainly has a very significant role, okay? Now, in terms of recovery, we then have to answer a lot of the same questions. Recovery from what? And what component of recovery are you going to measure? And if you're not going to measure, what at least is your assumption? Where if you have strong belief and strong evidence, whatever standard of evidence that you care about, remember, that's all this is about. You never need to use someone else's standards. You do your own thing. I'm just up here talking, okay? Now, when it comes to recovery, if you see that person X, has thousands and thousands of times did technique Y and something desirable happened, okay, well, you're going to use that level of standard. You're not going to measure it yourself. Everybody's different. I tend to think, and because you can't really prove anything that's happening, then I do think we should always be looking to measure something on our own. The fact is that you can't. I think at this level, you can measure things. At this level, there's probably less that you can measure, okay? So let's start by talking about if you do your keen movement evaluation and at some point pain is associated. Now, a whole nother discussion, whole nother topic. The fact of the matter is that manual therapy can be clearly used to change pain, okay? At the same time, if joints are not achieving the level of motion that that you decide they ideally need to. What are the positions of your next steps, whether it's ADLs, whether it's walking out to the car and turning on the ignition, or high levels of training. Can joints get to the right positions to absorb and adapt to stress? We know that sometimes that limitation of motion can be a motor limitation, which means the joints can get into the right positions to absorb and adapt to stress. They just don't do it all the time. We kind of think that's weird, all right? And then over here, you have a frank mobility limitation, where under almost every circumstance that we find that this person performs in the same way, okay? So if somebody has a stiff elbow into flexion, my arms are not small, but this is not this is not only a soft tissue approximation. My elbows do not God didn't give me elbows to bend, or the choices that I have made in my years have selectively limited the motion into flexion. Who knows? I don't remember. So when we further levels of testing, which will then help us understand when we look at this, when you look at my elbow, where do I feel it? Well, I feel a lot of it in here. I feel it kind of on the side. So when you have the joint that closes here and opens here, you will hopefully have some kind of name of a commercial model that in your brain going to your hands and how they move, you think you're targeting the joint. Okay? And if you felt it more here through the triceps, the anconeus, the lats, etc., I'm going to call that myofascial. And the reason I'm going to call it myofascial is because I have no idea or how anybody would suggest that they are affecting a muscle and not the fascia. I have no idea how somebody would say they're affecting the fascia and not the muscle. I have no idea how someone would touch another person and say, I'm not affecting the skin, okay? Or whatever layer of fat is underneath the skin, or then the dermis, or then the superficial fascia, and then the muscle, and then the profundus, and then any of the periosteum that probably does have some movement. If a bone can bruise, then the bone is susceptible to whatever depth that you might be achieving with your manual therapy. So I don't think I don't think there's a way to actually say that you're doing one thing and not another, okay? I do think that if you dry needle, I think we have more reason to say we're probably getting deeper, because you can do periosteal pecking and feel the bone. Well, you've got to be going through everything to get there. But when you're going through everything, how can you possibly say that you're affecting one structure? This is affecting the fascia. What I will use as a category where if somebody else tells me, remember, I'm not calling them a liar, and I know the technique can have value, if we're going to use something where the joint opens. So now if I stretch my hamstrings and I feel it in the back, we're going to call that myofascial. However, sometimes myofascial can also be neural, because nerves have typically, not typically, probably all the time, will respond to a different type of stretch. If we look at the stress-strain curve of a nerve, it will likely have a much different range. It'll have a different curve of what that looks like than a muscle or a fascia. Nerves just like to get long and come back, long and come back, get in and get out, get in and get out. Whereas other tissues, not nerves, will take more time under tension to create a response. And then there's a third group that probably explains why a lot of these work, and the NL stands for neurolocked. Neurolocked still looks like the same across a number of different positions. However, when you have techniques that work immediately, I have seen people dig their thumb into someone's back of their shoulder. Let's say they think it's the infraspinatus, and then they reach and then turn their thumb down. I have seen, oh my God, my shoulder feels great. They measure and their strength is improved and lots of really good things happen. Well, I refuse to believe that in a few seconds or a few passes of said technique, all of a sudden that you actually did something to the tissue. You definitely did something to the brain. You definitely created a cheap term. You created a sensory motor experience. So anything that happens fast, and you're going to see why I drew this orange line like this, neurolocked doesn't even require manual therapy, because you can create a sensory motor experience from different joint positions. You can create a sensory motor experience from breathing with these unique or maybe not so unique positions. But the bottom line is that anything that has a very quick and dramatic response would probably be much closer to treating the brain and how the brain is responding through the nervous system, particularly the autonomic nervous system. And I draw this here in the middle, as you see, to create this bridge between what we think we're doing when there's motion that is either stuck, weird, or screwed, but also how you may be able to achieve something in terms of recovery, okay? Now, I don't have anything here for pain. Well, here's the reason. I don't think anyone knows. Pain is this incredible cascade of a whole lot of things, some of which are mechanically driven. But remember, if something happens very, very quickly, well then it couldn't have been. It's impossible. Joint tissues, muscles, fascia, they don't change in seconds. The technique that affects one tissue but not other, I don't even know how that's even possible. So it doesn't mean that these techniques are wrong. It doesn't mean that vibration for 4 to 8 seconds doesn't affect the fascia as much as it affects something else. But how do you get there is not how your hand goes through someone's body. So this is a lot of things to consider. So what is probably happening here? Well, I think there's 3 things that actually can be measured, but are not part of this algorithm on how to choose which therapy you want to use. Well, I think those 3 things, number 1, first and foremost, is oxytocin. Oxytocin is why we like holding hands. It's why we like kissing. It's why foot massages feel really good. They're just all random forms of touch. And if we can then superimpose some type of anatomical reason, you might have more reasons to be correct. But ultimately, if you touch and you enjoy that because you've now released oxytocin, your body will now have some sense of, probably closer to the right word is safety, which will track us back to the autonomic nervous system. But ultimately, that's what this substance can deliver. So it's why we like holding hands, or maybe why certain romantic processes involve certain areas that have the highest level of representation in the brain. Your hands, your feet, your face, and your private areas have the largest representation. It's why they respond to touch and this emission of oxytocin. Furthermore, something very similar is serotonin. And then when we add it's very similar, but not only dedicated to touch. But the one other substance, a neurotransmitter, that is part of this reason as to why any kind of touch can be useful for pain, is to appreciate that if the person believes that this is going to happen, and they have, because whether they were right or wrong, see, that's what doesn't matter. This is like what patient beliefs, and we should be educating them. They came to you for help. You actually have hard science to demonstrate when you touch them and they feel better, and then all of a sudden they now have this release of dopamine. And obviously, manual therapy is not the only way to release dopamine. Your phone goes off, that you get a text message, dopamine, ding. But the dopamine is based on this conditioned expectation that when XYZ happens, something very, very good is going to happen. You got this message from this person that you're excited to talk to. This person, I'm so excited that they're going to do something to me, and in my mind, my joint is out. In my mind, they need to touch here because that's where my neck hurts. No, that's probably not correct in terms of understanding why someone would verbalize that their neck hurts in the first place. But the fact is that you can measure dopamine, and you can measure serotonin, and you can measure oxytocin. These are the reasons why manual therapy works. It's not because you necessarily did something to the joint. When these substances start to take up real estate in the neuroendocrine systems, all of a sudden I believe that we have this impact on the autonomic nervous system. And when the autonomic nervous system is conditioned to then change its flow of things such as catecholamines and glucocorticoids and adrenaline and noradrenaline, we may shift acutely, very short period of time, very, very quick response to have this shift into the parasympathetic system. And we know that manual therapy is not the only model that can do this, okay? But that's really where this tracks. But now if we don't do something that continues to lend to that shift, then I have no reason to believe that any of this stuff will work. So if we do not apply some type of physiological training, whether it be proper levels of work capacity, because probably how we got to limited levels of this and adaptations, even if it was just acutely through this, was in my mind acidosis, hypoxia, and significant thermal changes. So if those things were under recovered, aka we're going to get over here now, is how you have this buildup of this, creating this. And remind me, this is just what I believe. If I'm wrong, trust me, I have a pretty good chance that if I think I'm going to crack your neck, I expect it to feel better and I expect it to move better. If I'm wrong, I won't be wrong about that most of the time, and neither will your clinician. I don't understand how there's this challenge towards this type of process when, of course, you don't hear a lot of people talking about this, and you don't hear a lot of people saying you never really did anything to the joint. If I'm going to give you a grade 4 Maitland, or if I'm going to give you ART, or if I'm going to give you muscle energy technique, all of these things that really, really work, you can't possibly be doing something here, because those tissues, the collagen, the elastin, the reticulin, they don't respond in seconds, but your brain does by releasing these things, which then affect this, but I don't expect it to last unless we put something on top of that. Now, when we talk about recovery, when we look at not feeling good, we can go right to here, and that's why different manual therapies work. It could be from go back to massage, where I just need a pump, I just need a flush. You're not flushing anything. Maybe you flushed the toilet when you went to the bathroom. Hopefully you did. But all you're doing is creating environments here that drive this, which again can be measured. You can measure it through cheap ways, you can measure it through high-tech ways, but you can be objective as long as the tech is reliable. It doesn't have to be valid, it just has to be reliable. But something else to consider here is like when you identify what you're recovering from. Are you recovering from the normal and natural costs to the training process of hypoxia, of acidosis, and of increased thermal temperature? Yeah, that probably tracks to the autonomic nervous system, at least in my mind. But you could also be tracking creatine kinase. So when you have muscle damage, whether it's from injury or not, there is significant evidence that touch will decrease serum levels of creatine kinase. And you know what? Send me the research. How about you look it up too? Like that, it doesn't matter to me. Like, okay, but this is maybe a suggestion as to why some people believe that compression garments are good for recovery. Well, they might be if this is what you're targeting and this is what you're measuring. If you're recovering from something different, it may appear that compression garments do nothing. So the research that shows creatine kinase as a result of decreasing, as a result of deep pressure, is not hard to find. So we now have another reason to use our manual therapy, which maybe doesn't qualify as pain, which doesn't qualify in a chronic joint limitation, but will allow performance to return quicker. So now when we're in recovery, what we really need to be looking at is this, where we have this shock, and then we have recovery, and then we have supercompensation, so we can come back the next day. Now, if I can create this process, the shock is the same, but our resistance is a little bit quicker, and I didn't get to a higher level. This is the same level, but we got there quicker, so we can begin another cycle, if you will, of adaptation, which can happen over microcycle, macrocycle, however long you want to stretch this out. So the value of manual therapy for the purpose of creating an expedience in this training process, training and recovery, T equals R. Why do you know? To that point, I might tell you that I don't think there's any difference in this basic thought process of recovery and rehab. Maybe the only difference is between recovery and rehab is whether there's a perception of pain or frank tissue failure. If my hamstring is just really, really sore versus an MRI shows a grade 2 biceps femoris tear, am I really going to do anything differently outside of the volume and intensity of which I apply certain strategies? No, there shouldn't be anything different. This is why, there's no, I struggle at that gap that many of you know, that I don't talk about the gap between these two, training and rehab. I don't find it to be a valid point. And it also shows how different team members can apply their strategies. I have said for a long time that I absolutely expect the training and fitness process to minimize injuries. I think that's what we're all after. This is what we're all chasing. Well, then what's my medical people going to do? Well, my medical people are usually really, really good at manual therapy, where my fitness people maybe aren't. So how about I take my injury guys, my injury staff, and turn them into recovery staff. I might take my rehab and turn them into recovery, because they're not injuries, but they have a skill set, and they can just kind of change the scope on their weapon just a little bit, not to get them out of the hole quicker, but to get them into this resistance phase faster. That's another reason why anyone would or should use manual therapy. Last thing, and I'll say this again, I can only prove what I think. Okay, I don't because at the end of the day, if I have closing joint symptom, but I use an opening joint technique, it might work. This whole category is very fishy when you're looking for a very quick response. It's fishy in terms of validating why you did it in the first place. Very difficult, but it is primo. It is the absolute gold standard. Because when you can get someone to pain-free joint function, you get them into that training process as absolutely quickly as possible. And that's where your money is made. So if you can do manual therapy and get them out of this as quickly as possible and get them into a training process that's appropriate for their quality of joint tissue, the quality of their soft tissue, because you're going to just pick different choices that fill in another layer of gaps, okay? And clearly those gaps can further be minimized by training with areas that never had limitation to increase an ideal natural endocrine and hormonal system, to increase ideal immune system, to help this process as well, to train the heart, and your heart will work whether you got arms or legs, and have oxidative function of all general areas. So if we can put all of that together, it puts all techniques into this perspective of what we're trying to accomplish. And then when it comes to manual therapy, it's a little bit fishy. It's much less fishy when you actually talk about these types of substances, these type of neurotransmitters that are typically associated with a comforting sensation, a pleasant sensation. When we talk about what is this? Well, it's this pleasant experience. Okay, well, what is it? That's challenging to some people. So how do you bring them into the fold when you put the objective piece? And then we look at how do these things affect that. And if you just want to use heart rate variability, go ahead. There's a number of ways that we can measure the autonomic nervous system, as long as you're measuring it the same way every time. So if you need RMSSD, then fine. That's the most researched. You're going to stick with that. Let's look at it. So why don't you measure somebody before? You're going to do whatever type of therapy you use. You can measure joint function, which is not possible to zero in on any one thing, but then you're going to look at this. And then once you have that, then you can create the training environment to impact that as well, and maybe have less of a demand for manual therapy to get you out of the hole, and more need for manual therapy to help that recovery faster, so you can get more quality reps, more quality sets, more quality training sessions overall. I think that's really where manual therapy fits. Most people want to do manual therapy because they want to do manual therapy, and they want to be the one that helps you get off a table and be like, oh my God, my shoulder feels so much better. So that's all you need. That's a mistake. That's wrong. We have to be following up with an aggressive training process, because it was the training process that showed that they were not able to supercompensate from whatever cascade of load and stress that brought them to their shoulder to be jacked up in the first place. I hope that all makes sense. And if you ever tell anybody that look up in the tree and seen a leprechaun, say, yeah,